Welcome out to the Pressure Washing Pastor Podcast. I'm your honored and humbled host, Joshua Brown, and today I have got an incredible guest on the show. His name is Paul Sohn. He loves Jesus. He has an incredible transformational story, along with his mindset of what he does as it relates to training leaders to put faith at work into practice. And so if you're interested, been thinking about, man, how can I use my business as a place to fulfill the Great Commission, to make disciples? This is an episode you're going to want to listen to. But before we get into that, I want to share with you a piece of scripture that God has just been ripping apart inside of my world, inside of my life. And basically, it's when Jesus said, do not love the world. It's 1 John. It says, do not love the world or the things of the world. For the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life are not from the Father, but from the world. And if you love the world, the love of the Father is not in you. And man, this thing is just crushing me, because I'm like, anytime that I'm looking out and I see anything that might be pride inside of me, or fate, or lust of eyes or lust of flesh, I'm just reminded, not from the Father, it's from the world. And man, it's just crushed me, man. And as a guy who's got 6 kids, 22 down to 2 years old, I'm like, I know that I only want good for my children. And this is the heart of the Father. It's the heart of God. There's nothing that he wants to withhold from us. It's everything he wants to give to us. And so I got a question for you. When you look out inside of life, is there anything inside your lenses that says mine, mine, mine? Is there pride inside your life that everything's not his to begin with? When you look around, is there a desire for things and desire for other affections? And is the lust of flesh and eyes something that you see when you end up looking out? I want to remind you, God loves you. It's not for you. It's of the world. And for those who have been changed by Jesus and are followers and disciples of Jesus, we've got to rise above the culture that we're in, the kingdom that sometimes comes against our mindset, and turn fully back over to the God who just loves us. And so I want to encourage you today. I want to ask you a question. Is the love of the Father leading and guiding and loving you today? Or do you see this lust and desire and this pride of life? I want to remind you, if so, you're only one step away to turn. When Jesus used the word repent and metanoia, he was basically saying, change the way that you think and you'll change the way that you live. And so I want to leave that with you today. I want to encourage you, man. Just examine where you're at. It's not of the Father. It's of the world. Let's turn our hearts. Let's turn our lives over to the Father and just be faithful sons and daughters. And without any further ado, I want to welcome out my friend, Paul Sohn. Paul, what's up, my friend?
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. The first question I ask is always the most challenging, and it is, who is Paul Sohn?
Oh man, where should I start? Well, I am a 1.5 generation Korean Canadian American. So I have traveled, lived in multiple different parts of the world, but I speak both Korean and English fluently and understand the culture fluently. So I feel that's part of my story, part of my identity. I am also a husband to my wife and a father of our daughter, who is a year and a half. So that's been a joy to be able to embrace this new calling in the last year.
That's full time.
In terms of my work, I serve as the director of the Center for Faith and Work, which is a ministry of Redeemer Presbyterian Church here in Manhattan, New York.
Awesome. Is that with Tim Keller, or where he used to be at?
Right. That's the church that he founded in 1989, I believe. And the ministry, CFW, was founded in 2002. So it's been running for over 22 years. And yeah, I have the privilege of stewarding this ministry. It's primarily helping Christians really be formed into agents of renewal who integrate their faith and work for the peace and prosperity of the city.
So good, man. And we're going to get into more of that once we get into the purpose at work or faith at work portion of our conversation. super interested, both with, I've got so many questions, but I'm going to wait. So the next question I have for you is, would you mind sharing just your story with our listeners?
Mm. Yeah, so I um, grew up in Korea and also America, and I think part of my identity was trying to navigate who I am because I've been kind of living in the East and the West. And part of my story, I think, is trying to understand what is the calling that God has placed in my life. As a student studying in Canada, trying to achieve this American dream, I made it into college that I wanted. I graduated, got into my dream job working for a Fortune 50 company, but I felt miserable. I felt depressed. I felt meaningless. I really didn't know why I was feeling that. And that became a turning point in my life where I realized that all my life I was living for this idol of success. And that's when I started to realize there's something off, something's not right. And that brought me more and more to God. Even though I was a Christian, this kind of crisis made it much more of me seeking the Lord in all of my life. And I realized that, God has created me and called me for a purpose and a calling. I really wanted to discover that and live this life that God has given me, this gift of life that I did not want to waste away. So, long story short, I started to read all these books on discovering God's call in my life and start to make a number of changes in my life. And after 5 years working in this job, I ended up quitting this job, ended up writing a book that became Quarter Life Calling. Really, God gave me this heart to minister to the millennials and their 20 somethings, really struggling with their own sense of purpose and calling. And after that, God started to open up doors where I was being able to speak on this topic. And then I transitioned into working in Christian higher education and creating programs and directing things to help students really live in that alignment of their calling and career. And then most recently, I came to New York City a year ago to respond to God's calling on this new role that God has placed in my life at the Center for Faith and Work.
Awesome. If I would have met you as like a 7-year-old, tell me what life looked like.
As a 7-year-old,
Yep. I want to go back. I want to go back to childhood. Where were you living? What was your family dynamics? Talk to me.
as a 7-year-old, I was in America trying to learn the English alphabet somewhere probably in Miami, Florida, and trying to just survive and be in a classroom setting where I can just understand the language. So oftentimes I would come home and practice the alphabet with my mom. So that's one part of memory that comes to my mind as a 7-year-old. Yeah.
That's cool. Any siblings that you fought with, threw spaghetti on, or anything like that?
Yeah, I have one younger sister. She's 3 years younger than me, and yeah, we've had many days fighting and arguing, and yeah.
Where was dad at?
My dad, he spent all his life, his career working for a company called Samsung. He worked there 20, I think 25, 30 years of his life building a career there. And he retired years ago, but he became a senior executive at the company there.
Very cool. Yeah, I think I've heard of that company. It's pretty popular. It's pretty popular. I think everyone has something that was made by Samsung inside their home. I'm sure of it.
Mm.
You probably know the analytics. And with your personality, you're like 100% of all homes have da 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 inside of it. As were you a Christian then? Were you like, man? And
Yeah, I grew up in a Christian family, and we would go to church. So church was always part of my life. Um, so that's kind of the world I've known. But I think it was later until I went to Canada at grade 9. That's when I left my family. I basically was alone in a Christian homestay family with a church, with a school that I was part of. And that's how I realized that I don't I don't have anyone else except Jesus. That's when I realized this
mm,
faith thing is no longer just a weekly kind of a church going to Sunday thing. But at age 14, I felt like, man, no longer do I have my family nearby, friends. It's just me and God. So I think that's when God really has drawn near to me and invited me more to really, become his son and walk with him every step of the way.
What up, everybody? Hey, as you guys know, we are on mission to help purpose driven business owners get better 1% every single day. Well, today I want to take a moment to discuss our personal favorite business management app that we're in partnership with, House Call Pro. We have been with them since 2017, and with their all in one CRM, it has empowered us to continuously grow. Unlike other apps, it's actually simple to use, easy, while you have all the tools in-house. From invoicing, being able to take payments, scheduling, and customer communications, it is truly going to help you provide a 5-star experience, which we all know is how you're going to keep those loyal customers. If you are purposely looking to get better today, click the link below and get 50% off your first 2 months.
awesome. So your testimony really is one of generational faithfulness, and then coming to him at a very young age, at 14, to really have a new identity. I love that story. Um, when it comes to meaning on this in this life, I know that that we've got so many great writers over time. I was about to say Bonhoeffer, but Viktor Frankl, he once said that man distracts himself with pleasure when they have no purpose. When it comes to man's meaning on planet Earth, what do you think we're here for? What's man's purpose?
Yeah, I think as I think about that question, I think about what Mark Twain said. The two most important days in life are the day you are born and the day you find out why. And I think most people just go through the motions, right? They don't really necessarily know why they are here. There is this maybe implicit understanding of what success is, and everybody's trying to just chase after that. Whether you are in Korea or you are in America, there's a number of credentials or things that you should be having by this specific time in your life that you need to achieve. But I think at the heart of it, the meaning of life comes when we understand the very purpose of life, which has to be tied with our very calling from God. We are born and created not by accident. We have been given a God given purpose and a calling in life. And so there's this funny commercial that I remember watching, and it's about this elderly man. He was gifted this iPad from his daughter, and the scene is where he's at the kitchen chopping, some vegetables and realizing that the chopping board was the actual iPad that was gifted from his daughter. And it made me realize that if God has created us with a specific purpose and calling, and if you don't discover what that is, we might be using our life and living our lives in ways that we're not designed to be. And that I think is such a key part of our meaning and purpose in life, is to understand the very calling God has placed in our lives. So the word calling, I know, is very complex. There's a lot of baggage with it. And a lot of my work has been trying to demystify it, trying to help people understand their calling is very much connected to their well-being, to the meaning and purpose they find in their lives.
Define calling in your own words.
So I think calling is literally receiving a call. So it has to be something external to me. I cannot call myself. So it's God, the creator of the universe, who has created me and is calling me for something, calling me to himself. So there is this relational call to him, but there is a calling for something. And that's what I think calling is really about. It's not about me. It's about God calling me to the service for something that he has given me at this time.
So good. General calling or specific calling?
There's the general call, which is the call that we all are called to, being made in the image of God, to love our neighbors. How that calling is now manifested is different to different people. We have a particular call, and whether you have been called, like myself, as a husband, as a father, as the director of CFW, as a friend, as a member of a church, there are a number of different ways in which we live out our call in those different stations that God has given in our lives.
So good. Any scriptures for that?
I think what comes to my mind when I think about calling, obviously, is the great commandment, right? That's the general call. And then I think also the verse in Ephesians that talk about how we are called in different capacities, where we might have different giftings and roles that we might play as those who are teachers, those who are pastors, those who are called in a variety of different spheres based on our giftings, the ways in which God has also wired us as well.
Yeah, so good. So APEST, apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. And for those that are just now listening or hearing this for the first time, inside your local church, I would say, Paul, inside of the local church, we really don't unpack this well. We really say you're called, in my opinion, sometimes it feels like we're called to the children's ministry, or we're called to the youth department, or we're called to these different services. But when we look inside of Scripture, it seems like we're a body and that we all have different callings inside of the parts of the body that make up the maturity of Christ. So we got Ephesians 4:13 with what you just referenced, and then also the body of Christ. I absolutely love what you just shared. And for many of us, it's like, okay, I didn't even know that these things existed, because we think calling is more like if I feel like doing it or I don't feel like doing it, that kind of makes up our call. If I'm a young person, Paul, and I'm trying to figure out, is it me calling myself towards something or God calling me towards something? Any frameworks to help me with that?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I think first, being able to have awareness, I think, is key. So self-awareness, having God awareness is important. We are very much susceptible to deception. I think we have idols in our hearts. So whether it's a specific dream of, that you might have that's connected to the desires of your flesh, right? Like how we were sharing earlier, there might be pride, there might be lust of the eyes, whatever that is, being able to have utter just honesty and transparency with yourself, I think, is incredibly important. And oftentimes, for people who are married like myself, my wife plays a very important role in that, because I could say, oh, I feel this is where God's calling me, but I'm like, my wife would be, are you sure about that? Is that maybe part of your desire for control or desire for this or that? So being able to have that, I think, other awareness is key. And then I think, obviously, being able to understand that the storyline that God has created in my life, right? If God is the co-author of my life and he's calling me to live in the story that God has been writing, I have to understand, where has God, written these specific defining moments in my life? What are the chapters of my life? And being able to go back into your storyline and seeing your life from God's perspective, I think does a lot in terms of seeing yourself in a very uh, real way. And then as a result of that, you could almost think about, like, as you're reading a book and you're seeing, oh, maybe based on these plot lines, I could kind of see where God might be leading me next, right? So you almost could kind of journey with God in that light. So I think that part is also the awareness piece, is, do I understand the journey that God has led me on? Understanding that if all things are sovereign, if all things are providentially ordained by God, then I need to do this deep work and going back in both the highs and lows, and really re-examining my life from God's perspective.
Does this mean I need to be 100 years old to figure out what my calling is?
Not at all. I mean, this is something we do every day. It's a daily practice. Recently, I've been really implementing the prayer examine, the daily examine, where I come every night and just really try to trace, where has God's presence been in my life. And I think we're living in such a um, life where we are just having such a hard time with being attentive to the Lord. We're living, for me, being in New York City and Manhattan, we're constantly just surrounded by noise, surrounded by hurry, and it's really difficult to just really be able to pause and be still. But being able to have those moments, I think, are so critical to listen to God, because we're not listening.
Yeah, it's a fact. Hey, I'm going to interrupt for a second because we've got a phenomenal opportunity for you. If you've been thinking about opening your own pressure washing company, I'd like to invite you to a free webinar. There we'll talk about the pros and cons of opening a pressure washing, and you'll get to chat with our team about whether or not you should launch a pressure washing company in your city or not. To register for this free event, go to pressurewashingpastor.com, scroll down to the little registration button, it's blue, and click on it, and we'll take care of the rest. I look forward to seeing you there. Have a great day. Now back to our show. You called that the daily examination?
It's either called prayer of examine or the daily examine.
Yeah. Okay. And is this a framework or something? If I'm curious, I'm like, okay, I want to know more about that. Where do I go for that?
This has been part of the church tradition for years. It really got popularized by Ignatius of Loyola, and really has been a big part of the Jesuit kind of order. But it's a huge part of, I think, the church tradition in the way where we're trying to practice the presence of God, as Brother Lawrence and others have said. And for me in this season, I think it's something that I find particularly attractive, living in a city that constantly is going and never sleeps, and there's always activity, and I can find myself just drowning in that. But being able to be still, being able to really listen, is something that I think most modern people struggle with.
It's the last question I'm going to ask on this subject, but I feel like if I'm listening, I really do want hope. I'm trying to figure out, like, hey, I want to live my life on purpose. And we have listeners that some of them are home service business and some of them are pastors, and they're trying to figure out, like, am I doing what I'm called to do? Am I forcing myself in it? If somebody is listening and they're trying to determine what actions they should take next, will you just give some hope on some practical steps on what they can do to find out their next moves?
Yeah, so I think one thing it's really important is to, first of all, starting and ending with prayer obviously is key. But next to that is, I think, having your own board of directors, your personal board of directors. These are people that you trust, trust based on their character, based on the way in which God has led their lives and they've entrusted themselves to the Lord, and being able to really receive wisdom because they know you, they understand and see the ways God has gifted you and anointed you. So having that awareness from others, I think, is really important. Also understanding maybe there is the reason why you are kind of thinking about whether should I go this direction, this direction. There is this holy discontent that God gives in your heart. This is something that pulls you to a certain direction where you may feel this uneasiness, or you may feel this sense of frustration, and you want to do something to change it, to fix it, to make it better. That desire is what I call holy discontent. And that's something to really be looking for as you think about different transitions and different points. Also, another thing to consider is your life stage as well. We are all in different parts of lives, both spiritually, but also in a life stage as well. So there's going to be times where maybe you are called to settle and maybe called to really focus on, for me, in the last year, it's being a father. And, that's a big part of my calling that I'm embracing, that is going to take a lot of my time. So being able to recognize that we are multi-dimensional beings, that our life is not just, or our calling is not just our paid work. In fact, work is anything that is not rest and leisure. So every part of our life is actually work. And if you see that life in a very holistic way, I think it becomes more than just like, is it going to pay me more money, or is it going to give me the status for a specific job? There's all these pieces that you really want to take into consideration as you think about the life stage that you're in.
Appreciate you sharing that. I think you did a wonderful job giving some hope and framework there. I want to transition and asking specifically, what do you do today that gives you purpose at work?
Oh, that's a great question. I think for me, what gives me purpose is to know that I'm in this adventure with the Lord. I'm not in the driver's seat, that I get to witness what God does through my work. I think it's easy for me. I'm a Enneagram 1, which means I'm very much a perfectionist, and I can find myself trying to control every piece and trying to get to the specific vision I have in my mind. But what gives me purpose is to know that God's ways are not my ways. The ways that I think is the best may not be. So being able to know that as I embark in my work today, I realize that, I'm not in control, God. You are. So would you lead the way? Would you guide our conversations in our meetings? Would you send the right people? Would you answer my prayer? And as I approach my work in that light, man, there's this heavy burden that's being lifted because I'm not necessarily in control. God is, and that's how it's supposed to be. But, as leaders, I understand the pressure. There's pressure to perform. There's pressure from others who expect you to perform. So it's easy to kind of get into this vicious circle that I have to hustle. I have to do all it takes to be able to get all the pieces right. And there's a place for our effort. But I more and more am convinced that even having Sabbath, why God instituted Sabbath, is for us to rest and know that ultimately we are not in control, and God is the one who is providing manna, providing all the things that we need, so that we get to journey with God and allow God to do all the heavy lifting. And that becomes a testimony, because then it's not about, oh, how amazing of a work I did. I did all these different things. I made this achievement. This is all the things that I did. No, it becomes what the God did through me, but maybe with our team. Maybe here's all the people God has sent providentially. So it becomes less about me, more about God. And I think that gives me more and more purpose.
Yeah, it's good. You work at the Center for Work and Faith.
Center for Faith and Work.
I'm dyslexic, so I said it perfectly. What is the biggest problem you solve at the Center for Faith at Work?
The biggest problem that we're solving is to change the mindset where worship and being a Christian is not just something that happens one day out of the week, Sundays, but actually all of our life. As I've kind of described what work is, if every aspect of my life that is not rest or leisure, work, and God has called me in my original cultural mandate to multiply, to subdue, to rule the earth, that is my original job description, that I'm able to see everything that I do as God's, it's an instrument of God's worship. It's a way to worship God. And it's changing that paradigm, changing that mindset for many people where they just see any spiritual activity, whether it's going to community groups or reading the Bible or prayer, as sacred, and everything else is just simply secular. And we're trying to demystify that and say, no, all of life, even, punching in specific numbers or working on an Excel spreadsheet or, doing any menial tasks that is part of your work is worship unto Lord.
Got a question for you. Who is the greatest leader of all time? I know for many of us, we're going to point to our mom and our dad, or maybe even a coach or a school teacher that made a massive impact in our lives. But if we were to zoom back out of our area and look at the entire globe or of all of human history that we look back on, who do we want to look as a case study as being the greatest of all time? And I think it's going to be very difficult for us to find a greater leader than Jesus Christ. If he is one of the greatest, if not the greatest leader of all time, why don't we talk about it? Why don't we study his leadership, his game plan, his way of making an impact inside of this world? So I want to invite you to join me in my breakout session on Lead Like Jesus. During our time together, I'm going to teach you how to be a mission-driven leader. We're going to walk through the frameworks that I learned from Donald Miller as a certified business coach on how to create a mission statement. And more importantly, if you have a desire to make a difference with your business, we're going to talk about it. One thing we do here is we wash widows' houses in Nashville for free. I've even opened up a nonprofit, and I'll share with you a little bit on how you can do that. And I just want you to know, I am stoked to have the opportunity to share a little bit about my life and get to know a little bit about yours and teach you how to make an impact while making an income. I want your business to grow, but more important than your business growing is actually what you're doing as you're growing your business. And we're going to talk about how to be a mission-led business inside your community. What is the strategy that you guys use that works when you're trying to solve this problem? So can you just share with me kind of your strategy on how
Our strategy is that unless we change people's mind, anything we do becomes a mere behavior modification. It's merely putting a Band-Aid. So we go back to theology and really helping people see God as who he is, see ourselves in light who God is. So part of our kind of main process we use is called our Gotham Fellowship. It's a 9-month fellowship program. It's a combination, if you will, of seminary plus community group plus following kind of this rule of life in a community of 40 somewhat working professionals living in New York City. And you're diving into books like Augustine, Calvin, Luther. You are wrestling with all these biblical worldview stuff and allowing, how does the gospel renew my heart, renew my relationships, renew the world? and we're following that framework and going deep and deep and deep into it. So what happens throughout this process is you're learning in a community as you unlearn things that are maybe your old patterns, the old ways of thinking, and you're relearning ways through that are much more biblical. So that transformation takes time. Takes for us, it's like to do that in a city like New York City, Manhattan. It's difficult and challenging because such a transient city, such a busy place where people just struggle to have community and commit to something for that long. But we've seen people's lives being changed, and their lives continue to change after that when you really, focus on that theology and allow that to permeate into everything they do in their lives.
It's so good. If I'm listening to you today and I'm like, man, I might be a good fit for this Gotham, you called it Gotham community or Gotham
Fellowship.
Gotham Fellowship. Where do I go and how do I find out more information?
You can go to faithandwork.com. That's our website. And we are local to New York City. So the thing is, you have to live in New York City in order to go through this program. The good news is that there's 15 different Gotham fellowships all across the states. So you might want to look up Global Faith and Work Initiative. That's kind of our sister organization that trains up leaders and helps facilitate a lot of these Gotham fellowships across the nation. So there might be a place in your city that does this. So I would highly encourage you to go there.
Yeah. And so rewind, stop, pause, click back 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and make sure you check that out. Google it. Best football team in New York.
You asked the wrong person. I do not really follow football.
You're supposed to passionately just pick one of them.
Yeah, I'm a tennis player, so I really don't necessarily follow that sport necessarily. So
yeah, I'm a tennis fan as well. Are you watching the Wimbledon right now?
Yeah, I saw the highlights for the final and was very pleased by the Alcaraz, winning the finals.
That's cool. My favorite, not that you asked, but I'm just sharing. But when I was a kid, I used to love watching Michael Chan. Do you remember him at all?
Yeah.
He had these huge legs and he could just cover the entire court. And,
Yes.
he was a lot of times underdog, but he shouldn't have been.
Right.
He was dangerous. Who's your favorite?
He was good at clay courts as well. And it's all around player.
Yeah. Who's your favorite tennis player?
For me, the GOAT is Roger Federer.
Gotcha.
He's been my hero from day one. I own one of his rackets. I've played for 15 years with that racket. I'm a big fan of Roger Federer.
Bring your racket down to Nashville. We'll play in a couple of weeks, and you will whoop my tail. You can brag and say, I smoked this dude, because you would. I want you to go ahead and call somebody out on the show. You kind of see what our framework is like as far as testimony and faith at work and purpose and meaning. Right now, who would you like to see in a future show on the Pressure Washing Pastor? You get to call them out right now, and we're gonna.
Oh man, yeah. I would say Ariana Malloy. She's a former colleague of mine from Biola University, and she recently just published a new book that's coming up on healthy calling. So she talks about the intersection of calling and burnout. And she has done a lot of work on the culture of exhaustion, the culture of burnout in today's society, and how can we cure that? So she, I think, would be able to bring a lot of great insights into your podcast.
Awesome. I'll follow up afterwards and beg you to introduce me to her. I think it's appropriate, especially in the industry that I'm in with the home service business. It's a grind. These guys are sweating in the humidity, and they know working hard. Well, how do you work and rest at the same time and not get burnt out? So final question for you is, what's one thing you want our listeners to know before you go?
Yeah, I think for me, as I think about that, it's this idea that God does not call the qualified, that God qualifies the called. And again, as I shared earlier, in a world where it's so obsessed with achievements, credentials, it's just a profound reminder that God's ways are not our ways, and the Bible is filled with stories that God used where the world saw as unqualified, and yet God called them to play a very pivotal role in his redemptive plan. So I think about Moses, I think about Abraham, I think about all these people who lived a life of faith, but they were not perfect. And that in many ways comforts me, and hopefully comforts you, that in the midst of your weakness, God's strength will be made perfect there. And trusting in God's mighty work to show up in the midst of your weakness is a beautiful testimony and helps us become much more dependent on God more than anything else. And that's the most important thing I think it is, to be close to God.
So good. And so just to reiterate, if you ever feel unworthy, if you ever feel like you've made mistakes or you've got too much baggage, the greatest thing that Paul could share with you is like, you're the perfect candidate for God to do something amazing with. And so he calls the unqualified, which I know for me, I can say me, So Paul, thank you so much for being a guest today. I'll see you in the future. And until next time, peace.